Hey everyone, my name is Wedge and we're always looking for more budget-friendly standard decks, right? Well, not only is this deck standard legal, but it's $25 and it can win a whole bunch of games. Blue-Red Counterburn is a hilarious, fun, and powerful strategy, and if you're an Izzet mage or interested in the Izzet arts at all, $25 gets you a solid deck. I'll be using TCG player pricing throughout to show you just how cheap the thing is, and if you want to purchase the entire deck for the cost of 2 intro decks or see the list in full, click the first link in the description. I hope you enjoy. Let's do this burn thing. This deck doesn't run many creatures since we're spell slinging all day, but the creatures it does run, crazy powerful. We'll begin with one of my favorites, Baral, Chief of Compliance. The deck has 30 instants and sorceries in it, literally half the deck. Baral makes almost half the deck cheaper, and under $4 each is a steal for this. We're running 3, so it is a whopping $12, half of the total cost of the deck, but don't get it twisted, he's dang necessary. He puts you turns ahead, gives you more mana efficiency than any other spell in Standard right now, and his loot effect is just icing. Pair all of that with his 1/3 body that blocks a lot on the ground, and you have an all-star. $4 is a bargain. Next up, a full playset of Enigma Drake, and possibly the single strongest card in this deck considering, again, half the deck is spells. 3 mana for a flyer with 4 toughness is already pretty decent in this meta, especially with all the aggro decks and 3 damage burn spells running around. But add on to that how easily the power of this Drake gets out of hand and you have a real threat. Baral loots for you, you're casting spells the entire game. In testing, Enigma Drake was a 3/4 at the very least. Sometimes I got it to a 10/4, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that the Drake synergizes with the entire rest of the deck, and it's the primary win condition. The last creature in the deck is Bloodwater Entity. Doesn't get nearly enough attention, let me tell you that. 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer that comes with prowess in this deck is dangerous, especially when you add on the sweet perk of spell recursion. The average converted mana cost in this deck is a little above 2 mana. We're going to be cycling through spells left and right. To be able to grab the ones we need again and probably draw them immediately with a cantrip, game winning. Solid recursion, powerful creature in its own right, with prowess and flying and mana efficient, literally made for this deck. The creatures in this strategy are designed to support and take advantage of the bevy of spells we're running, again 30 in total. Since this is a Counterburn deck, we'll begin with our counter spells. 4 Censor are a must include here. I tried 2 or 3, but 4 is always better. There are a ton of low to the ground decks in this standard meta, and tapping out is something that happens a lot. Censor is going to trade for a valuable spell more often than not, and it has value in the late game with cycling, can't go wrong. Plus with Baral out, you can pay 1 for it, so that's gross. Next up is easily one of the best spells in the entire deck, Supreme Will. I love this card straight to Nyx. Mana Leak or Anticipate, basically. The increased mana cost is annoying, but the versatility is unbeatable. Again, a lot of decks tapping out and using mana every turn. Supreme Will shuts off most decks and is a great way to protect yourself against a huge bomb. Don't need the counter? Search for what you do need. Quintessential blue Swiss Army knife spell, does everything you want, gotta run it. The last main deck counterspell is Negate. This is absolutely a response to the meta right now. While creatures can be scary, your creatures are often way more valuable than your opponents. You need to protect them, and you need to stop non-creature shenanigans. We don't want Vraska's Contempt, we don't want Fatal Push, we don't want vehicles. You can worry about creatures later, we have spells for that, but the non-creatures, they are what will tear you apart. Negate main deck, important right now, very important, do not skip out on that. The other half of Counterburn is, of course, Burn. We're starting with a playset of Magma Spray. As someone who normally doesn't like Burn, I have to say Magma Spray is just my new best friend. This was printed at the perfect time in Standard. Scrap Heap Scrounger, Earthshaker Kenra, Ancrop Crasher, Champion of Wits, the list goes on and on. Of the uncuttable cards in this deck, Magma Spray is near the top. It's simply too well positioned right now to even contemplate removing it. Does work against most every strategy in the format. That Exile Clause is so brutal. Our other burn playset is Lightning Strike. There was a lot of back and forth between this and Abrade, but in the end, Lightning Strike just did more work at winning the game. Being able to hit your opponent is a big deal in a deck like this, and while Abrade comes with great versatility, it performed much better as a sideboard card than a mainboard one, at least in this particular strategy. We need the aggression of Lightning Strike as this deck goes for the jugular more than most. Ignoring your opponent's creatures is often part of the strategy. You gotta bolt them to the face. Now, while big parts of Counterburn are counters and burn and important creatures, what really brings this together and makes it consistent are the draw spells, the cantrips. I worked with a few versions of this deck that ran less cantrips, and the consistency was not there. You want to be drawing spells constantly, you want to be loading up your graveyard with cantrips for your Enigma Drake, and Baral makes most of them cheaper. Cantrips are important. With that said, we're running a playset of Opt. Players have a love-hate relationship with this card, and I wouldn't recommend it for every deck in Standard, but in this one, it's ideal. Cheap lets you scry and cantrips, as well as fills your graveyard with fuel for your Drake and Prowess triggers your entity. Solid card draw, we need this. We're also running 3 Chart a Course. The deck only has 9 creatures, but remember, we're running a ton of cantrips. Getting a single creature onto the battlefield to attack with isn't going to be the problem. Chart a Course isn't necessary enough for a full playset, but against a slower deck especially, attacking with Baral and then paying 1 blue mana to draw 2 cards, pretty gross. Now, if you do need to discard, that's okay. That's more fuel for the Drake, and more targets for your entity if you discard a spell. You win no matter what. Seems like not a big deal, but it's quite good. Getting into the most expensive cards in the deck, mana-wise that is, Glimmer of Genius is in here as a 3 of. No, we're not using energy at all, but I don't care about that one bit. What makes this card insane is the Scry 2 and instant speed. With Baral out, this is 3 mana. It's great to recur with the entity, and being able to look 4 cards deep, really hard to make a case against that. It's one of those spells that gives you reach late game to find what you need. It's how we can run counters and burn and be confident that we'll get either of them when we need them. Along similar lines, Hieroglyphic Illumination is in this deck as a 2 of. It doesn't have the scry advantage that Glimmer has, but the versatility of cycling is something you should care about a lot. We want Glimmer for that guaranteed value, but the Illumination is exactly what we're looking for as far as high cost card draw that comes with a lifeline. The card is always good. You can cycle it if you have to, if not you can wait and get some cards, trigger Prowess. Again, not the most exciting card in the world, but for what we're doing here, the cycling mixed with the card advantage is pretty much perfect for us. This deck is $25, so we can't do anything super crazy as far as lands are concerned, which is why we're running 4 Highland Lake alongside 9 islands and 8 mountains. Haven't had any issues producing either color of mana up to this point. The curve is pretty low, so you can do a lot with only a few lands. Running 21 in total, more than enough. Now let's talk strategy, sideboard, then upgrades. Counterburn is a spell-heavy aggressive strategy. I don't mean aggro as in you play creatures and then swing to high heaven. I mean you just keep casting spells aggressively. You will be using all of your mana on every turn unless you're actively protecting one of your creatures. Use your cantrips like you have a million of them, get Baral onto the battlefield as soon as possible, load up spells in your graveyard, be generous with your removal, burn everything to the ground, counter aggressively, don't let them play anything in the early game, especially the other aggro decks. Tempo is on your side, take advantage of it. Just listen, your deck is aggressive in every way a 9-creature deck can be aggressive. If you can counter something, you probably should. If you can draw cards, you probably should. If you can attack, you probably should. This is the ultimate form of spell slinging. Go insane, you're an Is It Mage now, you were born for this. Time to talk sideboard. Thanks to being red and blue, you have plenty of sideboard options. Sideboard the additional 2 negate against spell-heavy decks. You can also include a non-zero amount of essence scatter for creature-heavy aggro strategies, as well as a braid for any vehicle strategies you want to burn to the ground. If a braid isn't enough, release the gremlins can be a spicy one of in the board, but a braid should be enough. In addition, Sweltering Suns performs valiantly against token variants, especially because it doesn't kill Enigma Drake, and you only need a couple prowess triggers for the entity to survive it as well. Chandra's Defeat is the bee's knees against any deck that might run Chandra, anything running Glorybringer, basically mono red decks, you do not like them. That's most of your general sideboard suggestions. Against control decks, try to go under them. Against aggro decks, try to go over them. Time-tested strategy, enjoy the deck so far, good, it's upgrade time. One of the great things about this strategy is that the $25 version is actually competitive and quite powerful. If we're talking financial upgrades, it's more quality of life upgrades than anything else. For instance, the first thing you'll do is put in a playset of Spirebluff Canal. Smooths out your mana even more, can't say no to increased consistency. On the more expensive side, Search for Azcanta can be super good in this deck. It's much better when you have a Drake on the battlefield, but once it's triggered and flipped, the Sunken Ruin is going to give you gas for the rest of the game. Putting cards in your graveyard on the front has value and synergy for you, as well as the potential to ditch a card on the top of your library you don't need, and then the backside takes care of the rest. It's a solid card, but quite pricey. There are some versions of this deck using As Foretold, and while that card is pretty strong in its own right, I wouldn't say that it's necessary for this deck's success. If you enjoy playing it, then by all means, go nuts. The second that thing gets a single time counter, you're off to the races, a ton of free value, but again, you definitely do not need it. So what do you think about our budget blue-red Counterburn deck? It's $25 and will win you a bunch of games, easily competitive at the F&M level for sure. If you want to see the list in full or purchase the entire thing for legit $25, just click the first link in the description. I do hope you enjoyed this budget deck tech, and we have a ton more planned. If you have any suggestions or want to see something in particular, be sure to leave it in the comments and I'll do my best to oblige. And as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.